So I'm delighted to have Sana Musasama here again. She's been working hard. She taught one of our ceramics classes from her studio a few weeks ago. And then last night she did a ceramics chat where she showed us an amazing PowerPoint with her about her travels and projects around the world. So today she's in her studio. Um, she was a studio artist in residence at Dartmouth in 2007. And she is currently an adjunct professor at Hunter College in New York City and also John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New Jersey. Her work is in the Hood Museum at Dartmouth and many other collections. She has worked and traveled around the world as a way to further her education, and I think she'll tell you more about that. She's truly forged her own path with her ceramic art and her mixed media art, which she's going to show you some of that today from her studio. She's also become a social activist, and she is quite a fearless storyteller. She is not afraid to take on very difficult and uncomfortable subjects that I think she will tell you about. And I'm going to turn it over to Sana, who I've known for a while.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and to meet another population of students at Dartmouth. It was the residency was one of my favorite residencies, and I do them all the time, and many artists do them. Residencies are a way of removing us from our busy lives where we live and taking us someplace where we're isolated for sometimes 3 weeks to 4 months, and we push work and we don't have the day-to-day responsibilities that we would normally not be able to avoid if we stay in our own environments. But Dartmouth was a 3-month opportunity for me. I got a lot of work done. I met friends for a lifetime, and it was just wonderful. It was just wonderful being there. So it's one of my favorites. Residencies are the gift of time. I look forward to having more and more of them as time goes on. So one of the things that I'm thinking about as I'm saying is that some of you may ask, well, you have your own studio space, why go away? It's a very different atmosphere from your own everydayness world than when you isolate yourself in a place where you're getting up in the morning, getting your breakfast and just walking into a studio. Here I get up in the morning, I have a bathroom, I have a kitchen, I have a yard, I have a neighbor. All of these are wonderful distractions that get in the way of work. But when I go away, I have none of that. Somebody's providing the breakfast, and it's just studio time. So Dartmouth was great for that. And you're lucky to be there in a place where you can see these artists who are working through their lives and issues that are very important to them. So I've been working. I live in St. Albans, Queens. I live in the house that I grew up in. I have 5 sisters, and I grew up in an extended family kind of circumstance. The house always had a relative or visiting or somebody coming through. So extended family was something that was a good way for me and my 4 sisters to grow up. And the community embraced that ideology as well. So um, kids growing up in the 50s and 60s, we ran from one back door through every back door on the block, just running through the kitchens, no air conditioners. People didn't pay attention to TVs. People were storytellers. You ran through one household to the other and you heard all the stories of people's lives. And as kids, you know how you are as kids. You can be in a corner playing with something and a story can be going on the other side of the room and you have absorbed every detail of that story, even though you weren't sitting there with your eyes on the speaker. And so I grew up hearing wonderful stories, and then my dad made a career out of the military, stayed in it for 22 years. He often told incredible stories of traveling abroad, not always wonderful stories, but I'm sure I didn't hear the horror stories because my father was involved in, World War II, but traveling around the world. And my father spoke a few languages. And so guests were always coming to our household from other parts of the world. And I lived at the time in the 60s, right around the corner from a Navy base. And so this community was filled with military people who were transient, coming in, coming out. So I grew up with a wonderful, wonderful uh, feeling of diversity is being something normal and challenging, but at the same time worthy. Hearing different languages, being around different religions, systems, all of that was really very, very exciting growing up. So I never, ever, ever feared difference. I never looked at something else that I was unfamiliar with and became threatened or frightened of it. Um, I went to public school right around the corner. And in the fifth grade, we had the system of open enrollment that went on in the 50s or 60s now. And I had gone beyond the skills of my neighborhood in terms of art teaching, and my parents did not have money for me to go to an art school. So open enrollment was an opportunity to take, it was a thing about segregation, breaking down those boundaries that defined race. And I very much am a product of that generation that had those guidelines. And certainly my parents lived Jim Crow and redlining. So it, it locked people in. This was an opportunity of unlocking people. So I was very, very creative. I'd gone beyond the skills of the school, and I'd also gone beyond the skills of my neighborhood because we had this kind of open door system and extended family. My music lessons were by Aunt Mina, who lived next door. And Aunt Mina wasn't Aunt Mina. I mean, she was just called Aunt Mina. And then Mrs. Kimbrough next door, Anani, Ani Ruthie, all of these people were responsible for teaching us different things, but I outgrew all of them. So I went to this school, and it was an art school. And there, very, very, very difficult challenges because I went to a school where people were not accustomed to seeing difference. And so my world radically shifted from a very open environment where I was used to hearing different languages, used to seeing different dress, used to seeing different religions, used to seeing people disagree and not agree, but in harmony, and going to a place that was radically the opposite. So from fifth grade to eighth grade, it became the opposite of that. It became to almost Jim Crow and redlining right within a public school that I went to. Still, stories came out of that. And I became somewhat introverted and began to record stories and write stories. When I left the area schools, I went to City College in Harlem. And I was kind of fumbling, not really knowing what I wanted to study in, but I was very interested in people and I was interested in language. And so anthropology came up. I also had two parents who had deferred dreams. My mother born in 1917, my father born in 1915. My father would have loved to have been a lawyer. There was just no way in the world in the time period in history that he was going to be a lawyer. And not that it was impossible, but his journey didn't make it happen for him. He joined the military as a 19 or 20-year-old and stayed in it all his life because it was one of the few opportunities open to a Black male in his generation. So he would have studied law. He would have studied anthropology. My mother would have studied nursing, or my mother loved to write. So the things that my parents would have loved to do, they talked about it to their five daughters, and they almost became our little deferred dreams. So here I was at City College, not knowing what to be, what to study. The arts weren't encouraged. They weren't discouraged, but they weren't encouraged generationally. I have sisters who have children, who have grandchildren. If one of my youngest grandniece now is 8 years old, if she walked in and said, I'm going to be an artist tomorrow, everybody would flood to the gates to encourage her and push her to be that. But in 1957, when I said I wanted to be an artist, it scared everybody because they didn't know any artists that looked like me that could be a role model. And so they were fearful of that, very, very fearful of that. So when I got to college, art wasn't an idea to think about. But to get to the anthropology department, which was a daddy deferred dream, to get to all the other departments that were mommy deferred dreams, or Aunt Ruth's deferred dreams, or Aunt grandma's deferred dreams, because I come from generations of women and men that their dreams of what they wanted to be could not be actualized within the context of the time period that they came from. So I was floating with everybody's dream. But one of the things that was so wonderful that happened for me is that to get to the anthropology department, you had to walk through the art department, make a left turn, make a right turn, go out a door, and there was anthropology. Well, to get there, when I go through the door of Eisner Hall at City College, before I could make that left turn, and in that room, you'd smell the dust of the clay. In that room, it was in the 70s now, filled with women making beautiful, beautiful, beautiful objects, talking about the Vietnam War, talking about changing the world, talking about feminism, talking about racism, classism. All of that was such exciting information. I would stand at the doorway and peek in and just hear these incredible stories and look at these strong, strong women and just look at them and look at them. And then I'd rush off to my class. Well, I did this every day. I'd come early just to hear the stories by the door. And the teacher, Paul Chaleff, one day came to the door and said, "Why don't you take a ceramics class?" And I said, "Well, I'm almost graduating." He said, "It doesn't matter when you do it, just start it." And so I said, "Well, I tried a few times before and the class was full." He said, "Just get the paperwork and I'll fill it out." And I got the paperwork, Paul Chaleff filled it out. And the next semester I took a ceramics class, and it was my one semester before graduating. And I walked into a room and looked at a material, sat down, looked at people around me, listened to stories, and began to pick up a piece of material and began to shape it very, very, very easily. It required no prerequisite. For me, I began to shape. I looked at everyone around me. Everybody was silently working and working on their pots. I copied from this person, copied from that person, copied from that person, and began to make my forms. I felt an electricity in my body, and I said to myself, I want to know more about this material. I want to know more about the stories that generate people that come here. How do I do it? And so I took another class, and then I took a summer class, and then school was over. And what was there to do? I had had a shift in my whole consciousness. That I returned back to that kid who liked to play in the backyard with different objects and said, "Sana, why not try the arts? Why not try it? What have you got to lose?" I know that my mother and father were going to fuss, but at that point, I wasn't living home anymore. And so the loud screaming in my ear wasn't so prevalent. And I started doing research on ceramics. And what I found out about clay is the material that comes from all over the world, and it comes in as many personalities and textures and characters as people do. And that it comes in as many colors as almost as people do, and that it's all around the world, and that Mother Nature has made it. Of the clay that you may work in the studio now may have been a mountain 500 years ago. And the fact that it's all over the world, comes in as many colors as people, that and almost every race and class of people have picked up this material and shaped it. All of that reading returned me to my dining room table growing up, hearing these powerful, powerful stories. And so I decided then, and I was probably about the age of about 25, 26, that and I had graduated, and I felt that my degree was useless. It meant nothing. It didn't propel me. It didn't make my heart spin. It didn't make me want to challenge the world. It did nothing for me because I was following other people's dreams and not my own. And so at that point, couldn't go to grad school because I only had 2 ceramics classes, but I was following people around in residencies and seeing what they were doing. I got a book, did some research, and decided instead of going back into a classroom, I'm going to travel around the world and study ceramics. And that's where travel began in my late 20s. I made a list of places in the world to go to. I looked at pottery, I looked at landscapes, I looked at religious practices, I looked at politics, I looked at the women's adornment systems, and I looked at their art. I looked at their dress, and those are the things that made me make an itinerary. So I made a plan of doing travel for 5 or 6 years. And as a Black American, I decided to go to Africa first, and then from there travel to South America, then from there to Asia, and uh, Latin America, the Middle East, and then double back and go to all of these other places at different seasons. A lot of parts of the world, the culture changes or the systems change according to the seasons. And so I wanted to see what a place looked like during rainy season, and then what it looked like during dry season, and then what it looked like during the monsoon. So I'd go back to places that I'd been to in September, October, and then go back to them in March and April. And that began traveling, and I did it by myself. I would have loved to have friends to go along with me, but I couldn't find anyone that wanted to do it. And so I saved up money, got a job, saved up money, and bought a one-way ticket. At the time when I was doing that, and this was in the late 70s, I already had done a lot of research with other travelers, and I found out most people encouraged me, just buy a one-way ticket, don't get round trip. And my parents were saying, if you're going to do this trip, get a round trip ticket. And I didn't want to spend the money on a round trip ticket. And they were saying, if you ever get stuck in another country as an American, just go to the American embassy and they'll send you home and you don't have to pay for it. Well, I figured I'd try that. Well, it doesn't work that way at all. You go to the American embassy, they strip your life down. They want every job you've ever had, any person you've ever known. They want your social security number. They take your passport and hold on to it. And I said to myself, okay, from now on, it's round trip ticket. So anyway, I got my ticket. But anyway, what I'm saying is I began to travel, and in traveling by myself, I began to keep journals. I began to write down every detail of what I saw. And because I was alone, and I was lonesome sometimes, and sometimes I didn't know the language, sometimes I picked up the dialect. It was always changing because I was always around different people. I kept a book as a company. So my books and my pens became my sisters. Each one of them I'd grab and I'd write down what I saw, how I felt about what I saw. I'd make a sketch and then I apply a color to it. Sometimes I'd pick up fabric and stitch into the book. And so I began to make these journals and diaries of every minute of my life while I traveled. I witnessed many, 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 many things and still continue to, and experience different systems that we are not familiar with. I write them down. I write them down. One of the things as a traveler that I want to do always is be a listener first to a system that somebody employs before I judge that system or criticize that system for being antiquated, doesn't need to exist, or outright wrong. So journals are my way of putting down the pain of something that I saw that would not happen in our culture. And it became my pillow, it became my comfort zone. And these same journals that I would write in and do sketches in became the foundation of stories for my work 20 years later. So a lot of the work that I made in my studio starting, I've been working 35, 40 years now. When I came home, it was those journals that I would pick up and read the narratives that I wrote, because I spent a lot of time writing to myself every single day. Those became the sources for most of the work that I produced for the last 25, 30 years. So my work is about my experiences and my travels, traveling in developing countries, predominantly traveling as a woman, looking at systems that are different than my system and speaking about them, but first by listening and asking questions. So my work is social and political because it's about people. My audience varies, but 90% of the time, my audience is us, the Western population. But my audience is broadening all the time, and I'm learning it's important to broaden your audience. I fight against sex trafficking. I fight against girl soldiers. I fight against sex workers, not fight against, I support sex workers, and this is complicated. I fight sex trafficking with children who have been abducted. I support sex workers who feel that this is a valid profession for them as adult, mature men and women. I speak out against girl soldiers, traditional practices that harm men, women, and children. um, female excision, ritualistic surgery. The ritual of it is beautiful. The cutting, I question. So my work is all of these systems I've lived around. And so that's what the work is about. And the work is also biographical. It cannot not be, because most of the stories spring from my dining room table. So that's pretty much me, unless you guys have questions, and then it'll trigger me to what I maybe didn't share with you right now. And then I'd like to go from there with a conversation. Any questions?
Novi, and then Anna.
First of all, thank you so much for speaking with us. It's been really great hearing you talk a little bit about yourself and your work. I guess you spoke a lot about supporting women and female empowerment. And I was just wondering if you had any feminist icons or any women that you really look up to.
Oh, so many. And I'm so happy to say so many. And the list gets bigger all the time, all the time. But I would have to say that it starts right within my family. And my mother, my Aunt Dot, my Aunt Ruth, all of them, if my mother were alive, she'd be 103. My Aunt Ruth died 8 years ago at 95, and Aunt Dot 15 years ago at 86. They are really the strongest role models I have and the women in my neighborhood. And I never heard the word feminism come out of their mouths. Never in my life. In fact, I brought it into the house in the 70s, screaming at them. They never heard the word. They were determined Black women to live a life different than the one they came from. They were determined Black women to flip the odds and look another way and have tremendous hope. That is a form of empowerment without it being called feminism. So that's really, that's there. And then of course with school and experiences and traveling around the world, it gets bigger and bigger all the time. But I have a big family tree of feminists, whether they call themselves feminists or not. Just fighters, warriors, born to fight, born to talk back. And talk back in many ways. There's many ways of talking back. A friend of mine recently, I told her about an experience, and before I could even finish telling her about what happened to me, and she said, I would have just cursed them out. And I thought to myself, I got quiet and I got embarrassed when she said I would have just cursed them out, because it never occurred to me to curse the person out. I certainly was angry enough to use curse words, but it isn't my way of communicating. When somebody curses me out, I never hear what I did wrong. The door shuts down. I just want to move away from them and not hear them anymore. So it's not my way of communicating. Now, some people it works for, but talking back can be a variety of ways by just asking questions in a really gentle and kind and respectful way. All kinds of questions. Just be careful where you are in the world with asking them, and about gender, but the way you ask them. So thank you for that question. Anyone? Okay.
Hi, Sana. Thank you so much for being here. And I was just fascinated about hearing your story. I was wondering, since you've said that you've traveled all over the world, if you've had any experiences in Brazil, which is where I'm from, if you've ever been. If not, I was wondering also, you are evidently such a powerful storyteller. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what you found in the ceramics that that you found best conveyed a way to tell a story. Like, what is it about ceramics that just intrigued you and said, I can tell a story through this? And why is that your chosen medium to share your experiences, your perceptions of things?
Well, one that I would say is I kind of fell into ceramics by just walking through the art department to get to anthropology. So we fell in love with each other. I fell into that ceramic room and the clay kind of fell into my hands. But prior to that experience, growing up, lots of painting, lots of printing, lots of etching, collage, not a lot of some 3D work, but not a tremendous amount of clay. So actually when I got into that ceramic room there, it was kind of new in a way for me. I mean, it played with other materials that was like that, but it was semi-new. But you know how you have to have a prerequisite to a class to take the class? And sometimes we don't take the prerequisite and we struggle, but we still manage through the class. Well, I managed through this class without the prerequisite, a star. The things that I made were just incredibly, incredibly raw and beautiful. Incredibly raw and beautiful. I have a piece right here. I showed the group last week. It's all dirty now because I got clay all over it, but this is my first piece in ceramics. And I trusted what I felt, and I shaped this form. And I didn't ask myself about purpose or function. I was just trusting what I feel. And then when I got this piece and looked at it, it echoed a pipe that they used during a ritual in Africa. And so those kinds of magical things would make me say, oh, this is, you're on the right path. I would look at what I've made and say, that's right, keep going and keep going and keep going. It didn't require any rules, and there are rules, but for me, with prerequisites, blocking, fundamentals, I didn't need them. I picked up that clay and squeezed it. It took the memory of my fingerprint. And if I left it like that, it would be there forever. So for me, I always called it the obedient material. When I then took a class in graphic design, I said, oh, this is not working. A ruler, paper, hard edge, everything's clean. My shoulders went up, I got tense. I said, I need a prerequisite. I need out of this. So it was just something, my sensibilities, very, very, very easy. Very, I love everything about a clay, but I am also very, very mixed media. I use glass a lot, fiber. I mean, I use lots of materials, but clay is the dominant material. I love that it comes in as many colors and personalities as we do, and that no man made it, Mother Nature makes it. Now, what could be any better than that? Other thing is the cheapest material, art material to buy in the world. What could be any better than that? What could be any better? Nothing.
I should say that when Sana was at Dartmouth in 2007, she had a big exhibit in the Hopkins Center in the Jaffe Freedy Gallery. And she showed one of her series called the Maple Tree series, which you might be able to look up online. She showed it yesterday, but it was like a forest of ceramic trees with a lot of mixed media materials. And a lot of students helped do this very large installation. And she's done a number of different types of work. From pots to sculpture and especially mixed media. And I think today she's going to show us these dolls that she's sort of working on and that are in progress. And they include ceramics and cloth and some engineering for the one on Harriet Tubman that she has. So I think she'll show us a little bit more of her work.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, yes, of course.
Hi, this has been so great. Also, I just want to say that I went to Hunter College High School and my mom got her master's at CUNY. So I'm like a big fan of CUNY and that whole system. But I really resonated with what you said about deferred dreams and sort of your parents' fears versus what you know to be right for you. And I'm wondering how you handle that in later years, and if it ever sort of emerges in some way in your art, because that's something that I am sort of working through a lot these days.
So I'm not sure what your question, when you say in later years, did what emerge? I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
Well, I mean, you became an artist and you did not go to law school and you like you said, you traveled the world. And so, you know, after you were independent from your parents and living around the world, I wonder how you got such a strong and sort of emotionally mature perspective on all of those situations, I guess, and how that maybe changed.
Well, let me think about that.
I could say what you said yesterday, Sana, was that
I'm
when you said that girls all over the world, little girls even, were your teachers and kind of showed you things about the the surroundings that you were in and taught you languages and things like that, that you reached out to other sources for your
yeah,
instruction.
yeah. I also, because of living in traditional cultures, which are very, very family oriented, even though the idea of family is really very liquid, everybody's a family member, whether there's blood there or not. It made me create family all the time within communities of communities. So families within the ceramic community, family within the glass community. So I think if I understand your question, is I picked up support systems where they didn't exist. I recreated them for myself. I found the support systems that I needed. I found the alternative artist family that would be my fuel, since my own family could not be the fuel. They just didn't understand it or support it, and they feared it. And the thing also that I want to say, and that's Katie, is that Katie? Is they were wrong to fear it. They were so wrong. But they were living in the bubble of 1915, 1917, Jim Crow, lynchings, 2 generations from slavery. Here they have 5 daughters. They were frightened people. And my my father traveled around the world with the military, and so it was much later that him and my mother did with him. It was much later that they had children than most of the families on the block. So my mother was 10 years older than her best friend, Mrs. Wilson and Mrs. Kimbrough, because of the way her life navigated. Um, so I'm trying to think why. So I know that my mother listened to younger mothers with different views about how to look at things, but she was really, really locked into her generation of what it was. And now that I am, oh, I mean, I've been working all these years. My parents are long gone dead. My mother and father have been dead over 40 years. What I've done is I've taken my sister's children, and my sister's grandchildren, and I've held them by the hand and educated them through my journey to be my support system in case they encourage artists or teach artists or around artists. If I'm asking your question, Katie.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I really understand what you're saying about, generational differences. But
Yeah.
what I'm just so impressed by is that, I don't know, it's really hard to view your parents as real people, and real humans, sometimes. So just, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Lucas, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to pick up on that idea of community, and sort of the way that you connect with the communities that you've worked with and the sort of traditional practices that you've engaged in throughout the world. Just because something that I'm always in awe of with, or in relation to ceramics, is just how unbelievably old it is. Maybe not continuously, but
Yeah, but it's old. That's right.
like 25,000, 30,000 years ago, people were right. So I'm wondering, what is it like to be a part of this community that's not just a global community, but a community that stretches back tens of thousands of years, and sort of what do you learn when you engage in that process of finding out more about some practice or something around the world?
Well, and as you were talking, all of a sudden I saw all you made me evoke all these incredible smiles that would happen, like when I would go to a place to learn a technique, and I don't speak the language, no one speaks my language, and so what becomes our language is the visual language, and the way we shape and cut something, the way we look at, the way we stand back and question it. So what you just made me see is being in 5 different places of the world, and my little stations here, and I'm working, and somebody comes and look at my piece and I come go their piece, and our pieces start to smile at each other. And a language begins between those two, and then me and that person. And that's just continuously happens all the time. And sometimes, what's important is that these experiences are really beautiful experiences, but they're not always weaved together painlessly. There's a lot of hurt in some of this stuff. There's a lot of disappointment. There's a lot of misunderstanding and misinterpreting that. But you just roll over that as being a part of the experience. There's a lot of that in there, not understanding, a lot of going to bed crying, a lot of saying, this is wrong, to myself, but scared to walk outside my hut and scream and say, stop. There's a lot of that too. But there's also maturity with doing it. It's also aligning yourself with a bigger voice. One of the things that's very important for me now that I want to share with Katie as a support system is I'm saying to myself now that I need to not leave the studio, but become involved more with the undercurrents of movements that exist to fight what I'm trying to fight, but I'm doing it with art. That to hold hands with them, expand, really learn more about that. And I think it's important, but I also fear it because I fear to myself sometimes if I get involved with the New Jersey anti-trafficking organization in the way that I kind of think that I need to move a little more, well, I'm scared it may swallow me up because it's so big. If I get involved with the UN, with child soldiers, it's big, I'm scared it'll swallow me up. And my hearts of hearts is into telling the stories and making the art. So that's a little complex twist there. So working through the stuff, keeping desire alive. It's not easy, but it's certainly worth it. It's certainly worth it, Anybody else?
Noah, go ahead.
Yeah.
These
First
are
again.
hard questions. These are hard questions. I'm glad I'm not recording it. Yes.
Hi. So first, I just want to thank you for sharing your story and sharing your experience and work and knowledge with us today. One thing that kind of stuck out to me in your story was this balance, it seemed, between like institutional and like outside of institutional learning. Because you did come into contact with ceramics through institutions, but it seemed like for you, you found your best fit was to have a more organic approach. And I was wondering, do you think that there is one way that is better, is a synthesis more ideal for learning this art form or any art form? And just kind of just more of your thoughts about that institutional and I guess more organic approach in learning this art.
I think that one should learn something in all the many ways that one can learn it. I think it's very, very, very important. So I think sitting in academia was very, very good for me. And coming out of academia was very, very good for me. And then the travel becomes another form of a classroom. But I say everyone has to find the way that they learn best and blossom best too. And everybody figures that out by the time they get to your age, what's your way of learning, what's forced learning and what's not. This all this summer I had to take online courses to keep my adjunct jobs. That was forced learning and not pleasurable at all, hurtful and painful. What I would have loved had there not been the pandemic is to pick up my computer and go right into Hunter College, into the lab room where 8 or 9 people are there, like a village, like a classroom, and say, help me that way. So I think you have to find, and everyone says, oh, Sana, go do tutorials, go do this. I get sick and tired of those tutorials and webinars. So for me, everybody has to find the way that they prosper and work. But I think have as many kinds of experiences, as many kinds of learning experiences, A lot of it I experienced when I was teaching children. You're in a classroom and you've got 20 kids and they're all between 7 and 5. There are different ways that those children learn. And if we force one way of learning on them, we're only going to take half of the population with us. We have to find multiple ways, multiple voices to communicate. Absolutely. I think it's essential. There should be no one anything. Multiple ways of learning, workshops, travel, eco organizations, volunteer work, just like our mediums. We should not only make our art, we should also write about our art. We should perform about our art. We should talk about our art, I'm very much interested in filmmaking. I'm interested right now in taking these stories and putting them into comic book format for children as adventure stories. So these just keep stretching. That I think, just keep stretching. I call it having what is the expression? A boiling point life. I don't want to just be lukewarm. I want to be right at the point of boiling. Now, I don't want to combust, but I want to have a boiling point life. I want to feel it, every bit of it, good and bad. And I want to share it too.
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
Oh, Abby.
I have a question. Again, thank you so much for speaking to us. It was really incredible hearing your story. So I also come from a big family of 5, a reservation family. I'm Native American, and I have a similar upbringing to you where once you hit a certain age, you're considered an auntie to everybody else, and everybody is just like a community type, a very tight-knit community type living, where you run from one house to the other, listening to stories. And I was just wondering, what are some stories that you have brought to those gatherings, if you're still having them with your siblings? And what are some things that you share with like the younger kids now in your life?
Well, I teach children. I did teach children up until March, the pandemic, at Jamaica Art Center on Saturdays, which is a 25-minute walk from here. And I teach between 3-year-olds and 13-year-olds. And when I'm in the classroom with them, they're full of their own stories. So I'm just working there as a kind of like a guide to help them get their stories out. I never, ever share with them that I'm even an artist. I think they can kind of look at me with my clothes on and my earrings and my hair and figure out, well, she's different. But when I'm in a classroom with children, it's really about helping them to get their voice out. And what I find with 7- and 8-year-olds, no syllabus is required. They come in with already the ideas of what they want to go on and fabricate. And in terms of my sisters and storytelling, my sisters and I are all very, very close in number, very, very close in number, 18 months apart. So my story is their story and their story is my story. We're basically having all the same kinds of experiences at one time. And it's not a big house. So there were 2 of us per room. So what is exciting sometimes to be sitting around a table with them and they're telling their version of the same story that you're telling it, but they're telling it through their lens, but it's the same story. We share really much the same stories. I just chose to make these stories into real life by making art about it, and they went into other professions. So I wonder sometimes, though, my sisters are all reaching retirement and they did life very, very different from me. They did their undergraduate work, they did their graduate work, they did their PhD work, they went and worked in their fields, they married, they had children, they put in 30 years and then they retired. So they did incredibly different from me. I'm still working, will not be able to retire. I will be able to retire, but my retirement will be downsizing. Instead of working at 6 places, I'll be working at 4, and then I'll be working at 3, and then I'll be working at 2. But I'll probably always have to have a job where my sisters are living off big fat pensions and have a different kind of lifestyle. So I'll always be working and creating, and I'll always be traveling, and so it's interesting the stories that weave through. Telling them to my grandnieces and grandnephews is a pleasure. but you know, it's interesting. I had my grandnephew here 2 days ago, and I brought out a piece to tell him a story about. And before I could even tell him my story, he told me what the story was about for him. So I just shut up. He just told me what it was. I said, okay, that's good. Sounds perfect. And I just left my story out of it. You know, that's it. So who to tell the story to, who to share it with is a balance. And also to be a good listener. You know, sometimes, some semesters I teach at Hunter College, and I've been there 26 years, and that's the school I'm leaving. This is my last semester. Depending upon my student population that I get to know really well in 17 weeks by working in the studio and also being in the studio when they're working, is what stories to share and what not to share. And so in some semesters, it's been absolutely essential that I share with them what I've shared with each and every one of you in the last 25 minutes. Gives you all those personal details with no hesitation. And then share that with my students. And then in some semesters, well, they don't even know who I am. They don't even know who I am. They don't know that I'm an activist. They know that I'm an artist because I'm teaching ceramics, but they don't know where I live. It's just who to share and who not to share with. It's like who's your audience and who's not your audience. So that's interesting also with that, who to share the story with. Anybody else?
We have a couple of minutes left. Do you want to show us any more of your artwork?
Sure. So what's on the wall that you see behind here, and I'm going to bring them to you because I've got this set up perfectly so we can do the dolls, and I don't have technology here, but these pieces that are right here, I'll take this one down. So this is a piece here. Is this a good one? Can you see it well? Can you? Okay, so you can see the scale. It's a small piece. It's almost like the size of my face. This is a piece that's talking about female excision, a ritualistic surgery that has existed in many, 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 many parts of the world, including the United States. But somehow we only get the message that it comes from the continent of West Africa. And it's not only there, but this is my reinterpretation of a story about excision. So that's what this piece is. It's a ceramic piece. It's mixed media. There's red cloth here. That cloth is an indicator, a signifier of blood, wound. These forms here make me think of arms that reach out from the piece, but I've taken these arms, refired them multiple times, and pushed them into the openings of the clay. And in order for this piece to hang on the wall, it has a little attachment that's right on the back. Very, very lightweight piece, lots of markings that are on here. These markings that are on here are the marks in the landscape when I'm traveling around the world. Are they the tribal marks that a woman or man may have on their face? Or it's the textile in the fabric, or it's the bark on a tree. It is my way of talking without talking. So that's one particular piece. This series, my experience living in West Africa was in the 70s. So that was a very, very long time ago. It was 20 years later that I began to make these forms. In that 20 years, I was studying this ritual. So I have never spoken about any art form without knowing about it. Now, I can't 100% know all the details because I'm not of the dialect of the culture that practice it. But as an outsider, I've studied as much as I can, and my studying came from women who had these procedures done from them, not Western women or men who reinterpret them for something else. So that's one piece from that series. And that's what all of these are right here. All of these are variations, and what they are multiple ways of telling the story. So here's one from a long time ago. This is probably one of the first ones I made. And see, if you see this one is double my face. And when I first made these, came home from traveling where I witnessed these procedures, not witnessed in my eye, but vicariously through girls who told their stories, I came home and I was so emotionally full with things I'd seen around the world. I said, I'm going to make a series now, but I got to educate myself. So 19 years, I worked, I studied, I read, I traveled back, I found out, and then I came back and I was almost ready to vomit these pieces. And so when I made them, making them this scale, as I said, I'm making these forms to push them up into the face of Westerners, Western women, Western men, so they will know that somewhere in some part of the world, a young girl is going through an initiation that is life-threatening. So the scale was very big in the beginning with all of them. But as time went on, and as this ritual, which is private, became public through the newspapers and the internet in the 90s, and it became well known around the world, at that point, what happened in these traditional cultures where this was practiced and it was secret society, the age dropped. So a girl who would have been gone through the ritual at 13 was now going through the ritual at 7. And the reason why is because the girls were finding out that the procedure would be discomfort. And so they were running away from it. It caused so many problems. Cultures began to do this ritual younger. And so I reduced the scale to that smaller size piece that you have there. So that's these pieces here. And they're just all different variations. And here's one that's fascinating. And that this is where my mixed media comes in very much with this piece. So here's one. It's one of the smaller ones. It's one of the later ones. This is packing stuff. When you pack them, you have to pack them so well that they don't break. So just ignore that white stuff. But anyway, if you look closely at this piece, now these forms are all echoing a pod, a plant, a bulb. Initially they open, they shut with water. It's like, so they have an avocado shape. And so that's my metaphor for the vagina. These are showing the violations that happen to a vagina, the stabbing, the piercings. And then I had a bicycle that just, everyone said, give up on it, Sana, you need another bike. I took the chain off of it, and I took the chain and I wrapped it around the ceramic piece and fired it. And then when I looked at it, I thought about it, that this is really going beyond female excision. It's going beyond that to talk about more how all of us are trapped in some kind of way or encased within some kind of turmoil. Even within our own culture, we participate in forms of mutilation that are threatening. So you start off with one idea in your work and it expands as you're working on it, and the voice that starts off very small expands and gets bigger and bigger and bigger all the time. So,
Sana,
yeah.
I think we're out of time. Brandy just wrote in the chat that she has to run to another meeting.
Okay.
So, because I think they usually end at 1:30.
And it's right there, yes. Okay. Should I show a doll or?
It's up to Brandy. I think.
Yeah, I can make somebody else the host if you all want to keep going and talking. I totally don't mind that. I just have to step out. But I greatly appreciate you sharing your stories with us.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
I can be the host if students want to stay a little bit longer. I think they'd love to see the dolls, Sana.
I'm going to show the dolls. They're right here. So this is a series that I'm working on now. This is a doll series, and it's a topsy-turvy doll. And you guys Google topsy-turvy because we don't have a lot of time, but it's a historical doll that had 2 views. So the doll had 2 faces, one that displayed one time and another that displayed another time.